Okay, thanks for that introduction, Chris. Yeah, so what we're going to be doing today is talking about managing the fire service training program. And we're going to spend some time talking about program evaluation and how to conduct an evaluation of your training program, and also how to conduct an evaluation, an objective evaluation of your fire instructors. So, have you ever shown up to your firehouse and, or maybe you go in for your shift during the day and we hear, what are we doing for drill tonight? What's going to be, what's going on for training? Well, if you've ever heard this, and most of us have, then you might be in a situation where your training program is not operating as effectively or as efficiently as it possibly could. And that's what we're going to kind of talk about in today's webinar, is how to improve that training program and make it so that this question doesn't get asked, okay? So managing the fire service training program is one of the most time-consuming tasks in the fire service. It just is. Beyond the fire chief themselves, this would be the most uh, amount of responsibility and the most time, the largest time requirement there is as far as managing any part of of a fire service program. The fire service training program is an intense operation, and it requires a lot of man hours to operate effectively. That's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about how to identify requirements, because if we think about it, our fire service instructor has to identify requirements. They also have to identify skill level, so they have to figure out what level of skill the firefighters that we're going to be teaching actually have. We have to figure out a way to assess that skill. So how do we know how to assess the skill? Are we going to do this subjectively? Well, this guy looks like he's doing it right. Well, this guy doesn't look like he's doing it right. Or are we going to come up with a process to identify that skill objectively? Okay, and then what training is going to be needed once we identify that skill? And then we got to develop a plan that's going to meet the requirements that we identified when we're looking at what training is needed. Okay. And then we got to develop a schedule of those training sessions. And then we got to develop a lesson for each one of those sessions that we're going to be doing, where we're going to be teaching those skills that we've identified that we've needed. And then we've got to develop a presentation for that lesson. So we've got something, some instructor method that we can use with the students we're trying to teach. And then for each one of those training sessions, we have to have a captive audience who's going to sit there and listen to our presentation and improve their knowledge or skill ability. And then we got to record each one of those training sessions and then take maintenance of training records for all of the records that we create while we're doing it. So as you can see, this is a lot to do, and I only put 10 bullet points on this slide here, and it's only 10 examples of what the training officer is responsible for. But we can see this is quite an intense operation, managing that fire service training program. So intense that it becomes overwhelming for most of our fire instructors or most of our fire training officers throughout the country, especially if this is a position that you've been put into and not necessarily volunteered for. In other words, this isn't your strong point, but this is what the third year lieutenant does, type of a thing. Okay, so how do we fix this? How do we manage all of these huge bullet points that we just put up here? Well, we do that by including it in a process. So we take a process and we take each little step one at a time and complete that. Okay, so we take the big whole operation and we knock it down into a couple of different steps. And then once we break it down into a couple of different steps, we find that it's more manageable to hit those different bullet points that we're going to put into each step. So let's look at a 5-step process for managing the fire service training program. It would begin with a needs assessment. So in this needs assessment, we're going to find out exactly what it is that the fire organization needs. What do we need to be training on? Okay. Once we find out our needs, we're going to develop a program to meet those needs. Okay. So it sounds really simple. We figure out what we've got to do and then develop a program to do it. And then we have to operate that program. That program's got to follow some form of methodology. It's got to have some logic behind it so that the people who are understanding the program or taking the program can understand and retain what we're trying to give them. And then what we've got to do is we've got to make sure that that program is actually working. So once we've identified the needs assessment, we develop a program and then operate that program for a certain amount of time. We go ahead and we evaluate that program to make sure that it's fitting the needs that are required. And then there's the record and retention step, okay? Probably one of the most important steps of the entire thing. Because if we're not recording what we're doing, in a court of law or when OSHA knocks on your door, if you didn't record it, then it didn't happen. Okay. All right. So we'll start right out with that first step. That first step is that needs assessment. So we got to figure out what training do we need? What training do we actually have to perform? Okay. So and that needs assessment begins with looking at two different categories: internal needs and external needs. We're going to start today with external. Okay. So the external training requirement needs, those are things that come to us from outside of our organization. These are laws, okay? So we have several different laws and regulations and standards. So they come from the federal level. They also come from the state level, and there's even local requirements that you might be encountering. But we have to identify all of these different needs, okay? So most of those laws are probably going to be things that aren't even related to firefighting. Okay, they're going to be stuff that is just all employers have to perform, and the fire department is looked upon as an employer, even if it's a volunteer organization. The fire department is still the employer, and the volunteer firefighter is the employee. Okay, but those things that aren't are outside of firefighting are typically going to be your federal, state, and local laws. The things that we have to follow that are inside of firefighting come from standards and regulations. So OSHA 1910-156 is called the Fire Brigade Standard, okay? And that's a regulation, it's a law that's passed by Congress that says if you are a member of a fire brigade, and by fire brigade they mean fire department, you must provide your firefighters with X amount of training. Okay, so OSHA can get a little goofy because not everybody falls underneath the same OSHA standards. Okay, but OSHA is in all 50 states, so it's in all 50 states, which is a misnomer that some people think that oh, we don't have to follow OSHA because we're not an OSHA state. OSHA is in all 50 states. What it relies on is whether you're a municipality or you're a privately owned fire company. And I can't tell you right now which your fire department is, but it's something you need to look into. But it's an absolute fallacy that some people think that they are not under OSHA. Everyone, if you are in the United States of America, as well as several other territories, you are under OSHA in some way, shape, or form. Okay. Now, NFPA 1001 is a standard. It's a professional standard. So National Fire Protection Association has professional standards, and professional standard 1001 is the standard for firefighter. Okay, so and they break it up into firefighter 1 and firefighter 2. But what NFPA 1001 does is it identifies the minimum set of requirements that a firefighter needs to be trained to. And it's a minimum set of knowledge and skill ability that the firefighter must have to be classified or certified as a firefighter. Okay, and then there's mandates. What mandates do? Mandates are little gaps that governments like to use when they don't have a law for something. They'll set a mandate until they can make a law. And most of your mandate type training you'll find is like workplace violence, harassment training, so on and so forth. Some of those things will fall under your mandate. Okay, now internal needs. So internal needs is exactly what it sounds like. It is what does the fire department need internally? What type of training does it need internally? What are your organizational needs? What training does your organization need to be successful? Okay, and we can identify this through the OSHA Fire Brigade Standard again, which is 29 CFR 1910-156. In that standard, it talks about the organizational statement. What the organizational statement does is it identifies who you are as an organization. How many members do you have, and what does your leadership hierarchy look like? The statement also goes on to state, what do you do? What functions do you perform? What services do you provide? What is it that your fire department organization or fire service organization, whether it's a fire department, fire district, fire company, what do you do as an organization? What functions do you perform, and what services do you provide? How do you prepare to provide those services also has to be stated in this organizational statement. So that means what type of training do you do? What is the frequency of your training? How often do you train? And what is the total amount of training that you require of your membership? Okay, so if we write this organizational statement, we're going to make this whole needs identification a lot easier. Now, hopefully, your organization already has the organizational statement. Okay, so organizational statements aren't just required for fire organizations; they're required for 501c3s. They're required, for many other types of organizations outside of the fire service. So with any luck, you'll be able to go right to your organizational statement that already exists and pull out of that the training requirements. So what do I mean by that? Well, if your fire department is a structural firefighting organization, which means they go to structure fires, then you're going to have to train your firefighters commensurate to the duties of structural firefighting. So when we break that down, we kind of look at it, then that means we're going to have to train our firefighters in suppression activities. So we're going to have to teach them how to stretch hose, how to advance hose, how to apply water on a fire. We're going to have to teach them about direct and indirect attack, what a water stream looks like, so on and so forth. We're also going to have to teach them a little bit about tactical ventilation. What does it mean to introduce fresh air into the building while we're exhausting poor air and heat and gases, okay? They're also going to have to learn good rescue techniques. They're going to have to understand how to operate ladders, how to throw ground ladders, how to raise ground ladders, how to search for victims, how to remove victims from buildings, how to do victim carries, so on and so forth. These are the structural firefighting keystones that each firefighter must be trained in if your organization responds to structure fires. Now, beyond structure fires, if your fire department goes to motor vehicle collisions and you carry a set of extrication tools, then the firefighter needs to be trained commensurate to the duty of auto extrication. Same would hold true for hazardous materials operations, okay? What level of hazardous material response does your fire department respond to? Are you an awareness level organization where you get to the motor vehicle accident and you say, yep, there's fluids on the ground, we need a hazardous materials team? Or more than likely, you're an operational level fire department or organization where you respond to that motor vehicle accident and say, oh yeah, there's radiator fluid on the roadway here. We're going to use some speedy dry to soak that up. Or are you a technician level where you can actually put people in a class A or B suit, have them gear up and make entry into a IDLH that involves a hazardous material? So we need to train our firefighters commensurate to the duties that we expect. Okay. So if our firefighters are only trained to the operational level, they cannot put on a Class B suit and enter a hot zone. Okay? Same holds true for all of our technical rescues. So technical rescue, if you're going to be performing it as an organization, then your firefighters need to be trained commensurate to the duties that you're going to be performing. What I mean by that is if we have a river that flows directly through the center of our fire district, we do not need to train our firefighters on water rescue. However, if we do have a river that flows through our fire district, and in our organizational statement it states that we will make water rescues, then we need to train our firefighters commensurate to that duty of water rescue, which means we need to provide them the equipment to do it and the training of how to use the equipment. So nothing says that you have to do that. You could have a river that flows through your fire district and never have any water rescue equipment and never teach your firefighters how to do it. It's all in how the fire department or your organization is organized, okay? Now, I highly suggest that if you do have a river that flows through your fire district, that you train your firefighters in water rescue and provide them the proper equipment, because firefighters are very bad at standing by and doing nothing. So chances are they're going to do something, so we might as well be prepared for it and train them in the knowledge and skill ability required for that operation. So rapid intervention crew, the same would hold true if you operate a rapid intervention crew. So do you have a rapid intervention crew that responds mutual aid to another neighboring fire district? Or maybe on your normal assignments, one unit is picked out as a rapid intervention crew. Your firefighters need to be trained commensurate to the duties of rapid intervention. The same would hold true if you have a marine unit, okay? So if we have a marine unit, a fireboat, and we operate that fireboat in our fire district, then we need to be trained on the fireboat the same way that we would train our firefighters on a land-based apparatus or engine, okay? So moral of the story here is really simple. If we say we're going to do it, we need to be provided with the equipment and trained on how to use that equipment. Okay, so now let's talk about program development. Okay, so we have identified our needs. Now let's develop a program to meet those needs. So the training program, all right, it's developed by those identified training needs. And and that assessment of what we're going to be doing as an organization. And we take that organization, what we're going to be doing, and we break it up into different jobs that are going to be need to be accomplished to do those things. Okay, and what ends up happening there is we create these things called job descriptions. So we identify as a structural fire department that, hey, we got to have people that go into the burning building, search for victims, put water on the fire, and ventilate the building. Okay, we call those interior firefighters. That's a job description. Okay, job descriptions are developed to meet the needs of that organization by creating a job that can do the action or provide the service that we say that we're going to respond to. Okay, now job descriptions, we develop them for each position that we have. Your fire department may have multiple positions. You may just have firefighters. There may be no such thing as an interior or exterior firefighter. You're just firefighters. Or maybe you have support level members who don't necessarily put on turnout gear, but they go to structure fires and change air bottles and provide coffee and so on and so forth to the firefighters who are operating. All right, so that would be a different job description. You may have firefighters who just respond to airport incidents, okay, ARF incidents. So their job description would be an ARF firefighter, okay. So we just create these job descriptions based on what the expectation level of is of the employee who's going to be responding to said incident. From those job descriptions, we create job performance requirements. These job performance requirements are the specific skill that they're going to need to perform a specific job. Okay, so what skills do we need to do to perform most of these jobs? And we take these skills and we group them according to their tactic and task. Okay, so these basically define what the firefighter must be capable of doing in order to perform their duties. So we base these on skills that are identified through that professional standard, NFPA 1001. So this is real simple too, because basically what we do is we take and we say, hey, the interior firefighter, the structural firefighter, is going to need to take hoses into buildings, search for victims, use ground ladders to access upper floors, so on and so forth, force entry, and we identify everything that they must have to do, and we create a job performance requirement for each one of those skills. So the forcible entry is a different skill, the ladder raising is a different skill, so on and so forth, and we make all those different skills, put them together, okay, and now we have a job description that is full of skills that the firefighter needs to be able to perform to do that job description. Once we understand that, we now have to develop some lessons to deliver the knowledge and skill for each one of those job performance requirements. These lessons are going to be using a method depending on what we're teaching for each individual lesson, okay? So if we're teaching skills, then we like to use a demonstration method. If we're teaching knowledge, then sometimes we like to use a instructor-led PowerPoint presentation, okay? But these methods, they're going to be, everything's going to be based on that knowledge and skill requirement. And remember, we get that knowledge and skill requirement. What do they have to know? Well, that's identified in NFPA 1001. So that's where we're getting from. So the different types of delivery methods that our training program is going to use and develop is basically falls down into two categories, training and drilling. Now, a lot of people think that training and drilling are the same thing, and they use those words interchangeably. They are not, okay? They are specific to one based foundation for each one of those, okay? Training is a formal method of delivering some new knowledge or skill, okay? So when we train you, we're showing you something brand new, okay? That could be a skill, it could be a new piece of knowledge, it could be understanding a little bit more about modern fire behavior, or it could be learning about how ground ladders operate, okay? Drilling, on the other hand, is where we practice that new knowledge or skill, okay? And that's the big difference, okay? So training is a formal method of introducing that skill, and then drilling is practicing the skill, okay? Important to understand those. Those are two specific things. Now, to do training or drilling, we have a bunch of different methods we can follow. Training likes to use a lecture, a discussion, or a PowerPoint presentation, which is exactly what is going on right now. Drilling likes to use demonstrations or videos where we're showing the firefighter what right looks like. Okay, so our lectures and discussions are always instructor-led. Okay, So this is being instructor led right now, and we're in lecture format because you really have no way of interacting back with me. You could send Chris a text and he could ask a question in the middle of this, but really it's kind of tough to do. So you basically are sitting there having to listen to what I'm talking about without being able to interact with me. Okay, that's a lecture. We don't like using lectures very much with adult learning because we like to have the learner engaged where they can be asking questions and be part of the presentation itself. Okay, but normally what we do is we use a PowerPoint to deliver some form of knowledge, and we stand up in front of the classroom and we present this knowledge using exactly what we've done here today, just a basic PowerPoint that's bullet led, so that the instructor is getting his content across. Okay, now demonstrations are different on the other hand. This is where we show what the skill looks like. We're trying to show here what right looks like. And we can use a video for that. We can use a demonstration for that. We have a bunch of different methods where we can show what that looks like. Now, then we have our skill drill and our evolution or scenario. Okay, so these are more delivery methods that we can use as the firefighter starts to pick up these things and understand these things a little bit better. We can use a skill drill. Okay, this is where we practice that specific skill requirement. So let's think about this. We use a ladder analogy for most of the rest of this presentation. So we have a ground ladder operation. Let's call it a 24-foot extension ladder. We have to teach, first off, we have a job description that says the firefighter will have to carry, raise, and climb a 24-foot extension ladder. We then build a job performance requirement that says these are the skills that you need to have to do this raising of this ladder, use of the ladder. Okay, and then we develop a training session where we teach the firefighter how to do that, and then we practice the skills of actually physically doing it. That's where we're at now. So this is that skill delivery method. Okay, this is where we want to develop muscle memory. Muscle memory is going to become critical when we're trying to teach these skill drills, because what we want to have happen here is we want the firefighter to have such muscle memory in the skill that they're doing that they don't have to think about what skill that they're performing. So if I'm talking about the ground ladder raising operation, so on the fire ground, I don't want the firefighter to have to think about, oh, I put the butt end down, I drive my shoulder through, I put the ladder up to the just below the window for a rescue, and then I pull out the bottom. We don't want the firefighter thinking about that. We want the firefighter to have that skill built into muscle memory so that their focus can be on situational awareness. They can understand what's going on around them. So muscle memory is a unique thing. And once it's developed, it's a very powerful tool for operating at a high level on the fire ground. And I'll just give you a quick story so I can exactly let you understand what muscle memory is. Okay, so last summer I was making bubbles for my kids. I have 2 young children, and I was making them bubbles so they could go play with the dog and blow bubbles in the backyard on a nice summer day. So bubbles require taking water, putting a little soap in it, and then putting a little, there's another little material, I can't remember what goes in it, but you put those 3 materials together, the water, the soap, and this other thing, and you shake it up, and you've got a solution that when you put a little hoop in there and blow on it, it'll make a bubble. So I get done making this, and my hands are covered in Dawn soap. So I got to wash my hands off of soap. So I go to the kitchen sink, I turn the water on, and what do you think the first thing I do is? I reach over to the hand soap and put 2 pumps of hand soap on my hands and start rubbing my hands together. Now, understand that what I'm washing off of my hands is soap. Okay? So it makes absolutely no sense that I would put more soap on my hands to wash off the soap that's on my hands. However, I had developed muscle memory that every single time I went to the kitchen sink, I would turn on the water, put 2 pumps of soap in my hands, and begin rubbing my hands together. That's muscle memory. That's what we're trying to develop in our firefighters through skill drills. Okay, so we want to practice that specific skill requirement until they develop that muscle memory, until they can't do it wrong. Is what we're trying to do here. Okay. And then once they've understand that, once they've got that muscle memory down, once they've practiced the skill, we want to apply that skill, okay? And we're going to apply that new skill or knowledge in an evolution or a scenario. So we're going to have a controlled environment where we're going to actually go through these operations, these skills, putting more than one skill together and perform this on the training ground. So now we've developed our program. Now we need to operate it. So we got to put it into some logical format. We got to have some methodology that brings us all together and applies it and delivers it to our firefighters so that they can understand it and retain it. Okay. So what Vigilant uses is we use a program methodology. It's called a proficiency cycle training, and this is a cyclical operation that what happens is we build competency through the repetition of repeating this cycle. This cycle always starts with training and it ends with mastery. And we'll explain that a little bit deeper. So training, if you remember, we just got done talking about it. This is where we introduce that new concept or skill. This is where we use that formal presentation to introduce this. It might be a lecture, it might be a PowerPoint, but we're using that formal presentation where we're sitting the firefighter down and we have our captive audience that's learning this new concept or skill. Once we have presented that skill, we now drill on it. We practice it, okay? We perform that skill and we practice it through repetition, okay? And that's drilling. That's what drilling becomes, okay? So we teach that with a 5-step psychomotor process, which is how we teach skills. We teach it through a 5-step process. Once we've taught that process and they have now drilled on it and they've practiced it and they've got it down, we apply it in an evolution. Okay, so we've a controlled environment here where we apply it and we actually apply not just that skill but multiple skills here. Okay, so let's use that ground ladder thing again. Real quick that we're talking about. So we train the firefighter on what the ground ladder is. We teach them exactly what what the beams are, what the rungs are, how it operates, so on and so forth. We then show them how to raise it. Okay, so let's talk about we'll do a 2-person carry and raise, and then we teach them how to continually perform that operation until they build muscle memory. That's in their drilling. And then in their evolution, what we do is now instead of just saying, hey, just go through a ground ladder, maybe we're going to do a vent, enter, search evolution at the training grounds where part of the evolution is carrying a 24-foot extension ladder, raising it to the 2nd floor window. Okay, so that's where we're applying that skill that we learned. As we apply that skill, the instructor, we're going to be evaluating what that skill. We're going to be seeing what that skill looks like. So we're going to assess this concept or this skill in what we call a company concept, company competency. Okay, so we're not just looking at individuals at this level. We were looking at individuals back in the drilling level, and we kind of coach them through their performance at that point. Now we're looking at the company as a whole. How are they operating here? Okay, are they throwing the ground ladder right? Are they carrying the ground ladder? Are they working as a team? So on and so forth. Now, out of that, we might find things that don't look exactly copacetic, or maybe there's some skill that's lacking. Maybe they've thrown the ground ladder upside down. We identify here, though, deficiencies in the performance of that company, and then we have to identify some new training that's going to happen as a result of that deficiency. And once we identify, we just basically complete the cycle again. So we continue the loop. So we'll start with training. We'll drill them on that new thing, then we'll apply that in an evolution. While they do that, we evaluate them, and then we'll remediate and start that all over again until we develop mastery. And what mastery means is that they've developed muscle memory in that skill, and they can now do that skill without thinking about it. And once we hit the mastery level, one of 2 things happens. We move on to the next skill, or we take the same skill to the next step. So in our idea of the ground ladder operation, this might be maybe we taught them the 2-person 24-foot ladder carry. Now we're going to teach them the high shoulder carry where it's 1 person throwing or carrying and throwing the ladder and climbing it, all using the high shoulder carry. A little bit harder of a skill, okay, but still a ground ladder skill. But we've mastered the 2-person carry. Now let's work till we can master the 1-person carry. Okay, and then program operation continues to use that throughout the year. And what we do is we take that idea, that proficiency cycle, and we develop it into an annual training plan where we take all those training requirements, all of those needs that we had, and we put it into a plan and use that deficiency cycle to deliver the curriculum through that plan. And it always starts with that logical sequence of beginning with training and ending with mastery. And we deliver this stuff in a manageable blocks. So just like we've broken this training program into little bites, we break the training program up and deliver it into weekly bites. Because basically, you're going to have skills that firefighters need to perform weekly, and there might be skills that they only need to hit annually. Okay, so firefighters should be training in their PPE, SCBA on a weekly basis. Okay, but there might be some stuff like the sexual harassment training. We probably only have to do that annually, but we figure out the frequency of all of those different skills and different JPRs that we're going to be teaching, and we break them up into weekly, biweekly, monthly, quarterly, annually, depending on what the individual skill is. Okay, now that annual program basically just operates all on its own once we have developed it. But how well does it operate depends on our program evaluation, and that's what we're going to talk a little bit here about today. So our program evaluation. We have to evaluate the program just like we evaluated the firefighters. So we have to have a specific operation where we take the program and say, hey, is this program working? Is it operating correctly? Okay, so because what happens here is leadership's got to have an understanding of how effective the program is operating. Because ultimately, in the end, how well the training program is operating is how well your fire department is going to operate. Okay, if the training program is not effective, then there's no way your response to actual emergencies can be effective. So what we need to do is we need to identify that early on in the training program and make adjustments there, so that the end result, when we get out to the people in the field, it's fixed by the time we have to fix an emergency. So our evaluation includes every part of the training program. So we want to evaluate the lessons, we want to evaluate the presentations, we want to evaluate our fire instructors. Okay, and we can manage this with pre and post testing. An easy way to understand this, or how effective our training program is simply by testing our firefighters. So we give them a test in the beginning before we operate our program, and we give them a test in the end to see how well the program developed. Okay. So now I'm not talking about sitting our firefighters down and giving them a 100-question quiz as the first drill of the year, and then sitting them down and giving them a 100-question quiz as our last drill of the year. What's awesome with today's technology, and it's always advancing, is that we have ways of testing our firefighters without even letting them know that we're testing them. And one of the great ways that we can do this is through web-based quiz games. So there's web-based quiz games that are out there. One of them is Kahoot that I'll talk about real quick, and you can just look that up on your own. It's K-H-O-O-T, Kahoot. And what this does is it allows us to create a quiz bank of questions. So we put in our quiz question and we give 4 multiple choice answers, and then we build a bunch of those, like 20 of them or so, on the same category. And we have our firefighters take out their phones and answer these questions on their phones. And each answer is gauged by how fast they answer and if they get the correct answer. So let's say every question starts out with 1,000 points. If you answer right away and it's correct, you might have 950 points. If you take 20 seconds to answer and it's correct, you might end up with 100 points. But what happens is over time, all these points are added up and the firefighters are competing against each other to get the best score. And in the end, there's a podium and people can see who's on top of the podium, who's on the bottom of the podium. And for the firefighter, it becomes a fun little game, a little bragging rights for the winner. But for the fire instructor, what we get to look at is we get to look at what they got right and what they were getting wrong. We get to look at who got answers immediately and what answers had to be really thought about. And that's going to give us a good idea as to where our program stands. All right, so if everyone missed a question on what phenomenon transitions fire from the growth stage to the free burn or fully developed stage, and firefighters aren't picking up on flashover, then we know we need a little bit more training on fire behavior. Okay, that's just an example of how this could operate for you. Okay, so but we can manage that with pre and post testing, but get creative on your pre and post testing. There's so much out there that can help us and assist us with this. But what does it require? It requires time, right? And that's exactly how we started out this presentation, saying, honestly, the fire instructor or the fire training officer, there's a lot of time commitment in operating a program. Okay, so the program evaluation, a formal program evaluation, is going to begin with that needs assessment again. So we're going to review exactly what the needs of the fire department are. So we're going to review both the internal and external requirements, and this is going to be making sure that we're not missing something and we're still operating correctly. Okay, there might have been a new law that was written. There might have been a law taken off the books, or maybe now your organization itself is responding to an incident level that it wasn't responding to before, and now we need some training to close that gap. Okay, so we got to review the internal and external requirement. Okay, we're also going to identify here operational deficiency. So hopefully, after every major operation, your organization is doing a critique, and your critique isn't just a slap on the back. Oh, we did so great. Your critique is actually, uh, uh, hey, we could do better here, we could do better there, so on and so forth. And you're picking up on maybe some trends or some operational deficiencies that are blatantly obvious. Maybe it's taken a while for water to get into that first line, so you're identifying some pump operation deficiency. Okay, so we identify those operational deficiencies, and then we're going to come up with a plan to fix that. But we also need to evaluate our instructors and make sure that they're performing to the same level that we expect of our firefighters. Okay, and just like the firefighter needs to be well developed in throwing a ground ladder, climbing a ground ladder, using ground ladders, our fire instructors need to be developed in that preparation, presentation, application, evaluation. Okay, so we have to figure out where our firefighters are in that skill set. How developed are they in with the skills that we need them to be teaching? So that instructor evaluation. Let's talk about that for a minute. Uh, so two types of instructor evaluation. There's an informal instructor evaluation, and that remains continuous. Okay, so we're always informally evaluating our fire instructor, and this is just where we're just picking up on certain things and trying to gather a better understanding of how they relate with their audience and so on and so forth. So we're constantly monitoring that. We're monitoring those interactions. We're monitoring the content that's coming out of the instructor, and hopefully it's matching exactly what content is going into the instructor. But that informal evaluation is continuous. Now, a formal instructor or a formal evaluation of a fire instructor follows a specific schedule, and that schedule might be annual, might be biannual. It's up to the organization and what you feel comfortable with. I would absolutely recommend that you go no sooner or no earlier than a single year, and by any means no later than every 3 years. But this is going to depend on the size of your organization. If you have 3 fire instructors, then you can do it annually without any problem. If you have 300 fire instructors in your organization, then it might be pretty tough to get all 300 fire instructors done in a year. So you're going to gauge that by size. Okay, so the most critical thing here, though, is that a formal instructor evaluation is objective. Informal instructor evaluations very often are subjective, right? And that's just the fire service in general. We might break the chops of a fire instructor here and there, or maybe they said something wrong. I'm sure I've said something wrong here. I know I just called free burn, uh, but that's an old term, right? So if I use that with my people in my fire department, they'd say, "Oh, well, you teaching from 1987?" Okay, that's a subjective uh, evaluation. We're talking about being objective. So what does that mean? That means that it's got to be written down. So this process, the procedure for how you're going to evaluate, has to be written down. And what you're evaluating to must be in writing. Okay, so it can't just be subjective. This guy's pretty good. This guy's pretty bad. Okay, it's got to be this guy was good because he met this, 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 and this. This guy was bad because he missed this, this, and this. Without doing that, you run a huge risk of getting yourself involved in discrimination litigation. And everything that you do for a formal instructor evaluation must be objective. Okay, so we're going to evaluate our instructors as well as the program. Okay, and the way that that's going to happen is we're going to evaluate their ability to manage the classroom. Okay, so classroom management is going to be huge. How are they interacting with each person in the classroom? Are they interacting with people equally? Okay, and I'm not talking about race or sexual discrimination here. I'm talking about Are they interacting with the new guy just as well as they're interacting with the old guy? Are they interacting with the person who's got the skill down just as well as they're interacting with the person who doesn't have the skill down? Okay. If anything, a fire instructor's focus should be on focusing their most amount of time on people who don't have the skill down. Okay. If the fire instructor is trying to ignore the people who don't have the skill down, then that's a red flag. Okay. That's a definite issue. But how are they managing the classroom? Okay, how are student interactions? Are they interacting properly with the students? Is the interaction appropriate, and is the interaction with the students lesson driven, lesson focused? Okay, and how well are they using their training aids and their technology? Are they struggling with PowerPoint? Are they struggling with getting the audio visual machine to operate? Are they still using VHS tapes as opposed to pulling stuff off the internet? Okay, what is their use of this stuff? How well do they use it? How well do they interact with it? And how appropriate is it? Okay, how pertinent is their use of that? Okay, how well are they communicating the learning objectives? So if I had to pick out uh, one part of this instructor evaluation to be the most important, this would be it. Okay, communication of the learning objectives is critical. Okay, so in the process that Vigilant teaches, when we teach people how to be fire instructors, we start out every single lesson we teach with the learning objectives, and we physically read them or talk them or present them to the student. Okay, a lot of times, a lot of presentations you'll go to, people skip over the learning objectives. Okay, all right, let's get to the meat and potatoes. No, that's insane. You have to understand what the learning objectives are to understand what you're supposed to be learning. So we review the learning objectives, okay, and then we teach the presentation, all right, and hopefully that presentation delivered the learning objectives. But then at the end, in our summary, as we're closing up the actual program that we're doing, we repeat those learning objectives. And in repeating those learning objectives, we get to see, hey, did we meet those learning objectives? Can we now do what we said we were going to be able to do before this training? It's critically important, critically important. Probably the most important thing here, that the fire instructor is able to communicate those learning objectives. And I don't mean they can just say them. What I'm talking about here is they're able to identify the learning objectives and then present the curriculum in a manner that the learning objectives are met. Okay, and are they using appropriate instructional methods? This one's kind of critical here too as well. We don't want to be using a lecture for ground ladder operation, and we don't want to be using a skill drill for things that we should be learning in the classroom. Very important. So is the fire instructor using appropriate storytelling to get their message across, or are they telling war stories? Is this a pulpit operation, or is this a learning operation? Okay, appropriate instruction methods. Okay, so now we get to the part, we've gone out, we've looked at the instructor, we saw how they interacted with the class, we took some notes, we made objective evaluation of the ability of the fire instructor. Now what we have to do is we got to conclude this evaluation with a formal review of that fire instructor. And this is where we actually take the fire instructor and we're going to have a one-on-one discussion with them. We're going to sit down and talk to them in private and say this was your strengths and these were your weaknesses. And we're going to review this in a proper method where we go over all their strong points and show them exactly what they were doing great. And then we're going to go and hit the weaknesses. And we're going to talk about weaknesses where you could improve on this, this, and this. And then when we talk about improving on this, this, and this, we bring our strengths back in along with our objective needs of a fire instructor, and we say, well, you're really strong at doing this, so you're just going to kick it up a notch as you're talking about this part where you're a little bit weaker, and we know you're going to be successful. And that's important, okay, because what we're trying to do here is we're going to build and develop our fire instructor. We don't want to ruin them. We want to build them and make them better. So we're going to also offer supplementary support. Maybe they're missing understanding what learning objectives are. Well, here's a course that we have on exactly about learning objectives. Why don't you take this course? You'll understand learning objectives much better, and then you'll be able to use your strength of applying the you're really good at teaching the skill of ladders. Now you'll be able to really understand and apply these learning objectives, but just teaching the ground ladders, okay? That's where we're supporting, building, developing our fire instructors, and we're always ending those on a positive note because we want to develop our fire instructors, not discourage our fire instructors, okay? So that's instructor evaluation. Now let's move on to that last one, that record retention guy. Okay, as I said earlier, this is critically important because if we don't record this stuff, it didn't happen. Okay, so unrecorded training did not happen. All right, so if this should go to litigation, if there should be an injury or something, something's got to go to court. If it's not recorded, then it didn't happen. So we have to record everything that we do. Okay, that means recording individual training sessions. So we record those with a training report, and that training report is going to look a lot like a lesson plan. So the training report is going to have on it basically the cover sheet of a lesson plan. So what topic was taught, what learning objectives were met, what was the training goal, and what the training entailed, exactly what you did step by step, and then it's going to have some form of a roster attendance on it as well. Now, all those training reports got to be kept, as well as the individual records of the people who are going to those drills have to be kept. So we got to keep a permanent record of individual training completions. So we want to keep, for said individual, we want to keep track of how many trainings that they went to, what trainings they went to in an annual year. So we keep that in a record. We also want to know what the initial training of the firefighter was. How were they trained initially? What was the first level of training that they got, and how often have they had annual training on that? And we also want to know what external training the firefighter has acquired throughout their career. So we're going to keep track of all of their state certificates, maybe webinar, seminar certificates, so on and so forth, outside classes that are outside of the organization itself. All those are going to be kept. And they're going to be maintained and destroyed according to however your state says they are maintained and destroyed. So every record has a certain length. Okay, that's going to be called your state retention schedule for record keeping. You can look that up normally on a state website, and it'll tell you exactly what records need to be kept, how long each individual record needs to be kept, and then what to do with that record when you're ready to get rid of it. Okay, so you can't just throw it in the trash. There's got to be a certain process in how you record the destruction of those individual records. Okay. So let's review the 5 steps that we talked about. So remember, we do that needs assessment where we figure out exactly what training is required, both internal and external requirements. Then we develop a program that's based on those requirements, and we can figure that out by going into the NFPA 1001 to find out what skills we've got to be delivering. And then once we develop a program that includes a nice annual training plan and takes all of our requirements and puts it into a nice package, we operate that program, and we operate that program by delivering the training curriculum that we've built in a logical method. And the method that we talked about here today is that proficiency cycle training that starts with training and ends with mastery. And we operate that program for a certain amount of time, and then we evaluate it to make sure that the program is actually operating appropriately and correctly. And that program evaluation is going to evaluate our fire instructors and our curriculum the same way that we evaluate our firefighters and their skill abilities. And everything that we do in those first 4 steps has to be recorded and retained. And it's going to be recorded and retained according to how your individual state says records must be maintained and kept. Because remember, if we didn't record it, we didn't do it. So that's going to conclude today's webinar. I'm going to turn it back over to Chris here, and Chris will take your questions and give you some feedback on that. And I wish you all a great day. Enjoy the rest of your day and have a good week. Thank you.